I want to thank everybody for joining the call today. My name is Craig DeSessa, and I am the Executive Director of the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance. And the Alliance, as many of you know, was formed back in November of 2021 after Governor Youngkin was elected, and Winsome Sears, Lieutenant Governor Sears, and Jason Miyares, who's the Attorney General, recognizing that we had an opportunity to really get some legislation passed that would provide more opportunities for families and education. They all three told us when we interviewed them early on in the campaign process that they would support this legislation and other school choice legislation as well. This coalition today is made up of a number of organizations. I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But first, I would like to introduce some special guests we have today. I was contacted by a teacher at James River High School. His name is Greg DeFrancesco. I hope I said that right, Greg. And he is a teacher at James River, and he has a government class. I believe that's correct. And his class is joining us today. You want to show the class to us, Greg?
Sure. Yeah, there's everybody.
There's everybody. Great. So we're really thrilled to have. We're really thrilled to have you guys here today. This is unusual for us to have students, and maybe we set this up on a regular time because we do these calls once a month, and we have speakers and we talk about education and a lot of good information that maybe the students would benefit from. Who knows? Maybe a career will be spawned from this at some point. So anyway, that's the folks from James River High School down in Chesterfield, and we want to welcome them. All right, I'm going to share my screen with my PowerPoint so I can stay on track and don't go off the rails. All right, let's see here. Okay. All right, Lindsay, can you see that? I assume if you see it, everybody sees it. All right, so as I mentioned, we're the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance. And our alliance has a very simple mission, and that is the VEOA's mission is to create a statewide grassroots coalition to advance parental rights and education opportunities. And we believe that if we can expand education opportunities for parents, that is the ultimate opportunity to provide them with the right to educate their children the best way they see fit. So that is our mission, and that's what we're working towards. The coalition is made up of, all right, what happened to my cursor? All right, I've lost something here. There it is. So that's the VEOA Executive Committee is made up of the Middle Resolution, was another organization that I'm a head of, and we're a PAC. We get involved in elections, we get involved in lobbying and all kinds of things. The Thomas Jefferson Institute, which is a policy group here in Virginia. Americans for Prosperity is a national organization, but they are very focused on Virginia and the school choice movement. Virginia Institute for Public Policy, which Lindsay here is helping us, she's part of that group. They're another state policy group. Then there's Heritage Action, which is a national organization, but very focused on Virginia and helping us promote more options in education. And then, of course, the Family Foundation, which is also a state group that has been working with us very closely on this effort. So I wanted to make sure that we were aware of those groups. Let's see here. Why is this giving me a hard time? So what I want to do is talk about the legislation that we've introduced down at the General Assembly. There's two major bills that we've introduced. The first is called Education Success Accounts. It is the bill number is HB 1508. HB 1508 was carried by Delegate Delegate Glenn Davis, who is the chair of the Education Committee in the House. And Delegate Davis asked if he could carry this bill because he has a tremendous passion for this. And we said, absolutely. When you have somebody that's a chair of a committee carrying your bill, you tend to have a little more power, if you will, to get that through the legislature. Education Success Accounts, we got it into the subcommittee in the House, and I'll explain real quick. So you have full committees, what we call full committees. Education is one of them. And then usually those full committees break down into subcommittees, and there are 3 subcommittees in the full House Education Committee. One of those is K through 12, and that's where our bill went. And what they do is those subcommittees, they go through all the bills that they're assigned, and they pass some, they kill some, and so forth and so on. So our bill was there, and I'm going to show some testimony from that subcommittee hearing, which is pretty telling about where people are on this issue. But that bill went to the subcommittee, then it went to the full committee. It was referred to full committee. Then it was referred to, got through that committee, and then it was referred to what we call the Appropriations Committee, which is the big committee that controls all the money that we spend here in Virginia, our tax dollars. Unfortunately, in that committee, it didn't get through the committee for various reasons. And I can explain that if anybody would like to know why. So what they ended up doing, instead of voting on that bill, they ended up referring it back to the Education Committee. That's where the bill stands today. And unfortunately, there wasn't enough time to get it back through that committee and back to the floor so they could vote on it to get it to the Senate. So this bill is basically dead this year because of that, because we had crossover on Wednesday. Crossover is simply when you have the House passes a bunch of bills, they cross over then to the Senate, and then the Senate does the same thing with their bills that they passed. And then those two chambers vote on those bills. And then whatever's left, they end up sending those to conference committee, and they work through it to try to get a bill that everybody can vote on and pass. So education success accounts for this year is done. However, that's not the end of this. We knew that even if we got it to the Senate, that it would be killed in the Senate because the Democrats control, I hate to be partisan, but they control the Senate, and they do not like education choice legislation. So we knew it would die there, but we really wanted to get it there to just bring more awareness to this legislation. So that's the status with HB 1508. The next bill is that we've been fighting for is education improvement scholarship tax credits. We actually have a law in Virginia that allows people to donate money to what we call a scholarship granting organization, and they get a 65% tax credit when they give money to that scholarship organization. Meaning, if you have $1,000 state tax liability, and you give $1,000 to the scholarship granting organization, you get a $650 tax credit to your tax liability in the state of Virginia. It's considered a weak tax credit bill because there are many states that have much higher tax credits. Georgia, for example, has 100% tax credit. And that means if you donated that $1,000 to a scholarship granting organization, you got $1,000 off of the taxes you owe to the state of Virginia or state of Georgia in that case. So that is but this bill here is what it's doing is asking the General Assembly to increase that tax credit from 65 to 100%. So that bill has gotten through the House, and it's sitting in the Senate right now waiting for a subcommittee hearing. One other point I want to make about this piece of legislation, this is designed for low-income children. So that would be children that live in families that have incomes of 300% or below the federal poverty line. And the same, and then also it's 400% below the poverty line if your child has an IEP, as a special needs child. So those are the two major pieces of legislation that were in the General Assembly this year. And clearly we're not giving up. We've actually been involved in ESAs for 7 years now. And we actually got the ESA to the governor's desk in 2016 and 2017. Unfortunately, both those governors vetoed this legislation. So it didn't get through, it didn't get signed. So that's the status with this. What I want to do now is as I said, HB 1508 did go to the subcommittee hearing and did get passed there, but I wanted to show some of the testimony of what some of the people are saying about the bill that are in support of it, and then what the opposition is saying. The first person I'm going to share with you, and what happens is a video is going to come up. It's not very long, it's less than a minute. Teachy Pickney Epps, who I've highlighted here, she's a former member of the school board in Richmond City. And she has basically come to the conclusion that it's going to be a really long time, if ever, that they can actually fix those public schools. So she believes that students and parents should have options. Let's listen to what Teachy has to say. And before I start the video, this is Teachy here with the green shirt, green blouse. These two women are mothers. There was a number of mothers there that testified on behalf of our legislation. Here is Leon Benjamin, who's running for Congress here in Richmond.
Hey, Craig.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, Craig, but I think the link just opens a new window. So you'll probably need to reshare the screen because we're still seeing the PowerPoint.
You're still seeing the PowerPoint. Okay, so I
There's
need
one
to go down. I need to share. Okay, new share. Okay, right there.
Okay, perfect. Now I
Is that
see.
it? Okay, all right. So we'll have a few things we got to work through. So anyway, I just, so you know, those women are mothers that are supporting this bill. Let me share with you what Teachy has to say.
Next. And welcome to you, and
Okay,
again,
so I'm back.
brevity, please.
Yes, my name is Teachy Pinkney Epps. I'm a former school board member with the Richmond City Public Schools. I am as well a former assistant district director with the Virginia State PTA. So it's my honor to stand here before you to say, I support this bill because it provides an option. We all know the condition of our public schools. Some are thriving, some are not. In the city of Richmond, unfortunately, not enough of them are. And our parents need options. And at the end of the day, it's their right to make this
Thank you, ma'am.
choice.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right, so let me, so I got to, then now I've got to share my screen again. Is that correct?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, there we are.
Yeah,
So
perfect.
just a couple of points about what she just had to say, and then I'm going to show a sort of a response to what she had to say. I mean, Teachy basically says, we do have some schools that are doing okay, but we have a lot of schools that are not doing okay. And she's referring obviously to where she lives in Richmond, but this is the case all across the state, especially in your marginalized communities. And she's saying we need these options for these children to escape these schools, these horrible schools that they're trapped in because they live in those zip codes. Now, what I'd like to do is share with you, if I can get to it. Delegate Van Valkenburg is a delegate in Henrico. He's actually going to be running for the Senate against Senator Siobhan Donovan. And let's see what he has to say.
Outcome of this bill. Thank you.
Delegate Van Valkenburg.
Speaking to the bill, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
You have the floor.
So, if I thought that this bill would work, I would vote for it. Let's start with that. If I thought that this bill worked, I would vote for it. But the proof is that it doesn't work.
Okay, so you heard what he had to say. He says that this stuff doesn't work. Let me just get back to my PowerPoint. But you just heard what the former school board member said in Richmond City. She says, we need these options. We need these options. What happens is Van Valkenburg then goes on to talk about one study out of Louisiana that says that after Katrina, where a bunch of private schools and charter schools popped up because the public school system was wiped out, there was a report that says that the private schools did not provide a good education. It wasn't as good as the public schools, basically is what they said. And they kept referring to that Louisiana report. What Delegate Van Valkenburg didn't tell us is that that study was a part of 100 studies that were evaluated by a gentleman named Dr. Forster. I believe he's out of Arkansas, a University of Arkansas. And I'm going to have, he put together some research and he called it win-win because he was referring to the fact that education choice and public schools, it's a win-win for both. And he demonstrates that in this study. And I'm going to ask Lindsay to put that link in the chat so you can get to that report. If you can't get it there, you can get it on a website called edchoice.org. But what his research showed was there were three studies that said that there was that school choice had a negative impact on student performance. 3 out of 100. There were 10 that were neutral. There were 87 that said school choice provided a benefit for students. So they ignored completely all of the reports that say it has a positive benefit. Now, Delegate Van Valkenburg said he would vote for this if he thought it would work. Well, I find it very interesting because Delegate Van Valkenburg does think that school choice works. It's demonstrated in his own personal behavior. He has chosen to put 2 of his children in private schools. So just think about that. The hypocrisy is just, it's all over the place when they talk about this stuff. So that's Delegate Van Valkenburg and his response to Teachy Epps. apologize when we go to this one. The next one I want to do is I want to share. This is Candace Lucas. Candace is an advocate for special needs children. Now, Candace spoke virtually, so you don't have to be there to testify. You can, let me just get this up. Can you see that?
Yes,
Lindsay?
Mhm.
Okay. Candace is she's an advocate for special needs students in Henrico and Richmond City. Let's listen to what Candace has to say.
Thank you, Chairman. Advocates for Justice is in favor of HB 1508. We are certain that if Martin Luther King Jr. were alive now, he would support this bill under his Poor People's Campaign. Once again, education is the great leveling field. However, financing and funding for education is truly the great leveling field. This is not a voucher program. This is an equal access opportunity program. HB 1508 finances the civil right to an education. It's not about private schools. It's about educational opportunities. If you vote for HB 1508, you will ensure access and autonomy, specifically as it relates to communities of color and students with disabilities. In addition, when people say that public schools are going to lose money, no, we don't finance public schools. We finance and we fund students. We don't finance systems, we fund students. The money needs to follow the child.
Thank you,
And
Ms.
that
Lucas.
needs to change.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony.
All right, so you can tell that Candace is a little bit fired up, and that's how she is. She is a really strong fighter for students with disabilities in the Richmond area. And so what you heard her just say is basically that 1508, or education success accounts, ensures access specifically for children of color and students with disabilities. This is a woman who has jumped on board with this because she recognizes what it can do for the students that she's advocating for. Now let's listen to what Delegate and I can't say his name very well, but Subrahmanyam. Let's see what he has to say in response to this. All right. Before I start the video, the gentleman in front of you right there is Delegate Glenn Davis. He is the chair of the Education Committee in the House, and he's also the patron of our bill. He was the chief patron. He carried this legislation. He was up defending the bill and presenting the bill and so forth. And as I play the video, you'll see the delegate and you're going to have to listen closely because he's not speaking into the mic. And I'll tell you what he said afterwards, but you can see what he says.
So first, kids do have a choice right now. The parents can pay for private school if they want to go there.
All right. So what did he just say? He said, kids do have a choice today. Their parents can pull them out and send them to private school if they want to. All I can say is that this delegate is tone deaf. He did not hear anything that those people were saying that were testifying on behalf of this bill. What's fascinating is this delegate represents a community that has a medium income of $125,000. So he has no clue what's going on in these poor communities or in some of these communities. And that's the problem we have. These people aren't paying attention. The people that are opposed to this, they're throwing stuff up against the wall to see what sticks. They don't have the facts and so forth. So this is what we're dealing with when we're down at the General Assembly. This gives you kind of a general idea of, what the room looks like. You got the delegates sitting at the dais along with the chair of the committee, and then people walk up and they give their testimonies. So that's what's going on with 1508. That just gives you a general idea of what we're dealing with. Now, what I'd like to do is, before we go to questions, I want to just share with you a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but we are having our second annual Virginia Education Summit. And we entitle it Putting Children First. It's March 25th, 8:30 to 5 p.m. I'm going to have it put on the VEOA website here. I just noticed that the event's not been posted yet, but it's at the Virginia Crossings, which is in Glen Allen, Virginia, just north of Richmond. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of things. We're going to have speakers, we're going to have panel discussions, we're going to have breakout sessions, but primarily we're going to talk about what I call education entrepreneurship. what are people doing around the country innovatively to educate their children? You've heard of micro schools, you've heard of pods. Of course, there's homeschooling, it's been around a long time, and there's private schools. And so we're going to have a speaker there that she's going around the country looking at what people are doing, and she's trying to determine what regulations are preventing parents from actually educating the child the way they want to educate them. And then she's going to those states and saying, hey, you need to introduce this legislation to reduce this regulation or get rid of this regulation that's preventing parents from educating their children. I will say in Virginia, we're fairly homeschool friendly here. I homeschooled one of my children, at least 15 years ago I did. And they didn't make it difficult. I didn't have any real problems with the state or with the local government. But because homeschooling is taking off, there are parents now that are experiencing, what do I want to say? Just they're experiencing this sort of attitude from the principals and the administrators from their schools who are sort of frowning on them because they want to remove their child from the school. So we're starting to see some pushback on this, unfortunately. So anyway, that's the summit. I'd like to now, that's the website, www.veoa.org, and you can go there to register for the event. But as I said, it's not up there yet, but I'll get it up there this afternoon. All right, here's some of the questions that were submitted when people registered. I'm going to go through these. They'll probably answer a lot of your questions, but if there are more questions, certainly I'll look at the chat. All right, so somebody asked, who are the strategic players that we need to prioritize in our outreach to the legislature? Well, I'll start with the Republicans first. We had 3 Republicans who refused to vote yes for this legislation. That is Delegate Taylor down in Petersburg. She represents Petersburg, which to me and to many of us seems sort of unusual that she wouldn't vote for this, because what it would do for Petersburg, the children in Petersburg, is tremendous. I mean, as I mentioned, we are going into marginalized communities today and talking to people about this, and they look at us and go, why don't we have this now? And we say, well, because there are certain legislators who won't vote for it. So those communities want this. They want this opportunity. They want these options so that they can send their children either to a private school, or they can homeschool them, or they can set up a micro school. Anyway, we're still not sure why she refused to vote for it, but she did. There's Delegate Carrie Coiner is in Chesterfield. Now, Carrie's reasonings, she'll tell you there's certain things, but bottom line is she was a member of the school board in Chesterfield for many years, and the Virginia School Board Association, the Virginia Education Association, the Virginia Superintendents Association all oppose this legislation because they see it as a threat to their power base. And my sense is Delegate Coiner is still very connected to those folks that she served with for many, many years. And I'm sure they're telling her, don't vote for this. So that's Delegate Coiner. And then there's Delegate Bloxham is in, he's in Eastern Shore, and he's never been a fan of this. And I don't know that he'll ever vote for this legislation. And he has his reasons. But those are the 3 people in the House, or excuse me, the 3 Republicans in the House. On the other side of the aisle, there is no Democrat that has ever voted for any legislation like this whatsoever, whether it's the tax credit program or whether it was the education success accounts, anything that the Virginia Education Association perceives as a threat to the public schools power base, the Democrats are going to vote against, because they work very closely with the association, they're basically unions, they act like unions. So that's sort of what we're dealing with. So if you live in a district where you have a Democrat legislator, my encouragement is for you to go meet with your friends, your family, talk to them about this legislation, and then all of you go down and meet with your legislator in their office, their local office. You don't have to come down to the General Assembly. The bill's dead. No reason to come back down here. But go to them, go meet with, set up a meeting, call their legislative assistant, say, hey, we'd love to come talk to so-and-so about this legislation. And the more they hear from us, the more we're going to start to sort of put a crack in that brick wall that Senator Luis Lucas likes to talk about all the time. So that's who you can go and talk to. Next question is, when HB 1508 gets signed by Governor Youngkin, how will it benefit parents who are already teaching their children in homeschooling or in private schooling? Well, first of all, the governor's not going to get to see HB 1508 this year, but the governor has told me personally that he would sign this legislation if we could get it to his desk. This bill, let me explain how this bill works. This bill applies to children that are in the public school system today. So if you're in the public school system for a semester, you qualify for an ESA. And the reason why is because you're counted within the budget, the school budget. That's why. And so that money is already there, it's already budgeted, and then it can follow the child. If we were to include, and I would love to include all the students, all the kids right now that are in private school or homeschool, I would love to. The problem with that is the price tag. Well, there's several problems. One is the price tag. It's over $500 million you'd have to budget for these students if every single one of them got a $4,000 scholarship. There's 110,000 students, 110,000, maybe 130,000, up to 130,000 people are young students that are not in the public schools that are being educated by their parents in homeschooling or in private schools. So you do the math, it's simple math. 4,000 times 120,000 gets you to almost $500 million. And that doesn't include all the other stuff. So that's the reason why we didn't include it. Now I want you to think about this. I'm going to do a little story here, and this might explain some things about the bill. Imagine you have a family and they have two children. One is Ian and one is Colin. Ian is in kindergarten. Okay. So he's already in the public school. He does not qualify for an ESA if he is not in the public school. If he's homeschooled right now and he's in kindergarten, he would not have access to that money for his whole K through 12 education. However, his brother Colin is in preschool right now. Next year, if this bill were to pass, let's say we passed it this year, it became active or live on July 1st of 2023. And so students going into school in the following fall, Colin would be going into kindergarten. The bill states that if you're going into kindergarten, you qualify for the ESA. All right. So here you got a family, you're gonna have one student that doesn't get it, but you got one that does. Now, Colin is going to be able to have an ESA throughout his whole K-12 career, whether he's in private school or homeschool or in a pod or in a micro school. Okay. Now think about this for a second. Ian and kids his age, as they get older, kids start aging out of the system, the public school system. By the time he's in K through he's in 12th grade, all those kids behind him, all of them qualify for an ESA. Every single one of them qualified for an ESA because they got into kindergarten when the bill was passed. I hope that makes sense. So Colin can stay at home school, be private school, and he will get the ESA. But in 12 years, and I know that's not a big consolation for parents who now have kids, they're homeschooling kids and need the money. But in 12 years, this bill will include every child in Virginia. Now, does that mean once we get it passed, we won't fight to try to get every kid qualify for that bill? Yes, we obviously will. In Arizona, they passed a similar piece of legislation in 2011. It wasn't until last year that the bill actually included every child. So there's a process you've got to go through. And the big part of that is the money I explained to you. So that is why right now, students that are not in public schools do not qualify for the ESA. Here's another question. What does the process look like to charter a new school in Virginia? So in Virginia, of course, charter schools are public schools, and we only have about 8 in Virginia. North Carolina has around 150, 170. I don't know, the number changes a lot. And so the question is, why do they have so many and we have so little? It has to do with our Constitution. In our Constitution, if you apply, you can apply, anybody can apply to start a charter school anywhere. There's a lot of hoops you got to climb through, but your application eventually ends up at the local school board. Well, the local school board is the end game right there. If they approve it, you get a charter school. If they don't, you don't get a charter school. Well, local school boards are not likely going to pass an application or accept an application for a charter school. They're just not. They don't like charter schools. All right. They see them as a threat. So in Virginia, we have to pass a resolution in the General Assembly. And once it gets passed twice, it has to be passed twice to amend the Constitution, then it has to go to a referendum. So there's a high bar to change the Constitution. And we've tried and we've gotten close, but it's been killed. So Senator Mark Obenshain every year introduces this resolution to change the Constitution. And unfortunately, every year, since the Democrats have controlled the Senate, it's been killed. So That's the charter school process in Virginia until we change the Constitution or until school boards get flipped. And you've got members of your school board who are in favor of this. That's another path. And then one of the things the Middle Resolution is doing, an organization I'm involved with, is we're getting involved in school board races and trying to flip school boards. And we had some success last year with that, and we're going to continue. So anyway, that's the charter school process here in Virginia. Next question is, what is the amount to be dispersed to families? And it says they're not clear about the 5% that's taken out of the money. So the amount that's dispersed to the families, as I said earlier, is about a third of the total funding for a child. On average in Virginia, it's $13,500. Now there are communities, I think Alexandria, Arlington is up around 20,000, and then there are other school districts that are 10,000. That most of that difference comes from the locality. The localities put up a lot of money in Arlington per student. In your rural counties where you have more poverty and you have less tax base, they put less in, the locality puts less in. But on average, it's around anywhere from $4,500 to $6,000 would follow the student. 5% of that is retained by the Treasury, and that is to administer the program. You got to pay for the administration of it. So we take 5%. So if you got a $5,000 scholarship, 5%, $250 would be retained by the Treasury. So that's how that works. I hope I've cleared that up, because they seemed a little confused about it. Next question is, instead of government taking our money and giving it back with strings, why not ask for a tax break for homeschool students? I love that idea. Whoever suggested that, I encourage you to go to your delegate or your senator and say, please introduce a bill that gives homeschooling parents a tax break. I think that's great. And if you do that, you put that bill up, the VEOA would get behind that, likely. So that's what I would encourage you to do. I've never seen a bill that's introduced. We do have the tax credit bill that I talked to you about earlier, but that's for low income families. Let's open up the opportunity for special needs students to attend schools to fit their needs. Well, that's what the ESA is all about. It's about giving parents resources so they can take their child out of the public school if their needs aren't being met, and send them to a school that does meet their needs, or homeschool them. We had a parent who has testified over the years for us. Her daughter is severely autistic. She's in a wheelchair. Haley is her name. And Lisa has come down and testified and said the public schools aren't doing their job. They're not giving my daughter the education they're supposed to be giving. I want to see this happen. So the special needs children and families would benefit tremendously from just passing HB 1508. Let's see here. Here's a question. If 1508 doesn't pass the Senate, assuming that it does pass the House, what is Plan B? What is the specific Senate races that will be the focus? So we know that it didn't pass. So the plan is to continue fighting and growing this coalition across the state. I have given 4 presentations in the last 7 days. Lexington, Stanton. Well, Stan, I didn't give a presentation. But I provided feedback as somebody did give a presentation. Yesterday, I talked to a women's Republican club in Henrico County. And so we are going all over the state, and we're presenting the idea of education choice. The one area that we are making tremendous inroads would be in the marginalized communities. We are starting to get, as I showed you, Teachy and Candace. Those folks are on fire about this, and they're talking to their friends. We have had meetings with just school teachers and administrators from Richmond Public Schools who were not in favor of this when they walked in the room. When they left 2 hours later, I won't say they were completely in favor, but they certainly were asking a lot of questions. At one point, Candace said to 2 of the teachers, she said, you know what this is going to do for you? By the way, these teachers kept saying, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money. And I made the point to them, I said, is it more money or is it better appropriations of the money? Do we need more funding, or we just need better appropriations? And they nodded. They said, yeah, that might be part of the problem. What Candace told them was, she said to those 2 teachers, you know what this is going to do for you? This is going to allow you to leave the public school system where you have so many challenges, and you're going to be able to start your own micro school. And those 2 teachers' eyes lit up. They saw the possibility. In Florida, I was talking to a gentleman down there. They've got great school choice in Florida, and they've had it for 20 years. And I was talking to a gentleman who's been following the school choice movement down there. He was part of it. And he said what happened, as soon as the funding started to come unavailable, you started seeing church schools open up. You know, you got a church that's got a building that's empty 5 days a week. So there was funding available now. They started opening up church schools. He said over 50 church schools were started as a result. And then Former teachers that have decided, I don't want to be part of the public school system anymore, are starting micro schools. And it's happening in your marginalized communities, your low income communities. So that's what's going to happen here. If you provide this kind of funding, eventually it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but you're going to start seeing these new ideas in education start to flourish. So our plan is to continue this fight. We never really thought we'd get it through the General Assembly this year. And this year is an election year. That makes it a little dicey as well. But our goal is to have this on Governor Youngkin's desk before he leaves office in 2025. So that's our goal. We're not giving up. Here's a question. Why not spend valuable time and resources to open a Christian principal approach school to offer a solution to the system? Well, I will tell you that is what we have done. Middle Resolution was instrumental in bringing a low-cost, high quality education school system to Virginia. When our bill got killed in 2017, we knew it was going to get killed, but still, when it happens, you're frustrated and you got to figure out something. And we said, we have to go outside the legislative process. And we identified a school down in North Carolina called Thales Academy, Thales. The short story is this: we convinced them to open a school in the Richmond area. They opened in March of 2020 in the midst of COVID, and the school enrollment, they were packed because parents were looking for an alternative. Thales Academy is $6,000 a year. All right. They take no local, they take no state, and they take no federal funding. The gentleman that started it is a billionaire today, but he was very poor growing up. And he's just a really smart businessman, and education's a passion. And he figured out how to run a school on a tight budget and provide a quality education. The first 3 graduates from their high school in 2014 got accepted into Brown, got accepted into Stanford, and there was another Ivy League school I can't remember. And those kids didn't want to apply there, but he paid them to apply there to prove that he had a quality education there, because he refused to get accredited by the state of North Carolina. So great idea. Let's start up some schools. If you know of a church that's got empty rooms for 5 days a week, go talk to the pastors there, go talk to the leadership and say, hey, I'd love to offer up maybe a micro school where we hire 1 teacher and we bring in, 5 students. You can do that. All right. So it's a great idea, but we got to start moving on it. Okay, here's a question. I think this came from the students, and this is a great question. What is the strongest argument made by those who oppose ESAs, and what do you believe are the flaws in that argument? I would say the number one thing we keep hearing is you're defunding the public schools. All right. Now, the public schools have been receiving more and more money for decades. They continue. This is the mantra you hear. We're not fully funded. We're not fully funded. There's actually an organization. It's a national organization. They have state chapters, and it's called Fully Fund Our Schools. When you ask them, well, what does that mean? How much money do you need? And this organization in Virginia says they needed, I think it was $350 million more for the public schools. Okay. Well, why do you need that $350 million? Well, they really can't explain it. All right. But that's just the mantra we keep hearing from teachers, not so much teachers, administrators. But when you look at them and you say, well, do we really have a funding problem, or do we have an appropriations problem? And many teachers and administrators will stop and think about that, because it truly is the problem. We've been feeding our schools money year after year after year, and we're expecting a different result now. What did Einstein say? At least he's been given credit for. Keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is insanity. All right. So is it really funding that we need, or is there a major shift in the way we teach our children in public schools? And that's what this will do. This will provide competitive pressure on the public schools. Everywhere you have school choice programs around the country, they've documented this. The data is out there. In fact, I don't know if the win-win article we just put up in the chat approach deals with this, but there's another piece that was done in 22 called Who's Afraid of School Choice? And they track the data on the performance of public schools and the funding of public schools where school choice has been introduced. And what they've seen is the public schools continue to receive more money, and there's an improvement in the performance of the students in the public schools. It's incremental. It's not this huge shift in a better performance. But what you're seeing is a pressure being put on these public schools. In Florida, I went to college in Florida in the 80s, and we used to joke about the performance of the public schools there. They were awful. Today, Florida's got some of the best public schools in the country, and they've had school choice for 20 years, 23 years now in Florida. Dade County, over 50% of the students in Dade County have used some sort of choice, school choice. And it's done a tremendous job for their education system. So going back to that's the funding thing is what they always want to say, but if you really throw it back at them, you pivot on them, you can respond to that. Another one that we get, which is a legitimate concern, is when we're talking to folks in the NAACP or in the low income communities, they go, look, we love your idea. We love the idea of students having options, but in the marginalized communities, those parents, first of all, they probably won't know about the program. And if they did know about the program, they probably wouldn't have the ability to navigate that program because you have to go online, you have to apply, and so on and so on. Well, what we've discovered is in these communities, there's already organizations that help students go to college. And we've talked to these folks and they've said, oh my gosh, if you had this program, we would add this to the list of things we're helping these people do. Now, we would have to put up more organizations to do this for public schools. There's a lot of students in the public schools in these marginalized communities, but we have committed to these folks that we would definitely have some way of making sure those folks in those marginalized communities know about the program, have access to the program, and know how to navigate the application process to make sure they get the money. And then the last thing is, how do we ensure that Black-owned businesses that provide education services are able to apply to become a pre-approved provider of education services? So we would want to make sure that that happens, provide equal opportunity for these folks to apply to be a provider of education. So those are two of the things that we hear. A number of other oppositions to this bill. It's racist. Well, this has been debunked now for 2 decades. But the history of racism with school choice is real. It happened back during the 60s, in the late 50s, when Brown versus Board of Ed said, you know, you've got to segregate your schools or desegregate your schools. In Virginia, especially, we led the nation in this. Senator Byrd and his machine they created a school choice scholarship for white families so they could leave the public schools so they wouldn't have to be with the Black students. There were counties like Prince Edward that closed their public schools for 5 years. I think it was 5 years. I could be wrong about that, but it was around that time. So these poor Black students didn't have a public education. Now, a lot of their parents educated them. They homeschooled them, basically. They filled that void. So it does have a racist history, but that is not what we're talking about today. As I said, and I showed you on those videos, those were women of color who were fighting hard for this program. It's not a racist program. We hear that occasionally, but they've sort of stopped using that because it's been pretty clear that this helps the children in low income communities across the country. So those were some of the questions that I got. I'm going to pull up what time is it? We got a few more minutes. Let me see here. I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see here.
We did have a couple of questions. I saw the first, there were a few comments about how homeschoolers not being able to engage in high school sports with the public schools is an issue, and some questions about how we might be able to address that.
Yeah, that they call that the Tebow bill. It's been introduced as long as I've been doing this for about 15 years. And not only do you have the Democrats do not like it at all, but you have Republicans too, who just will fight this. And again, it has to do with their relationships with their local school boards and their relationships with their superintendents. The school boards and the districts do not want these children to participate in school sports. They have their reasons, but I will tell you, around the country, when I tell people that we don't have this, they are surprised, because it's the rest of the country, not the rest of the country, but a lot of states have the homeschool students have the ability to participate in local sports. It's just a matter of, we've just got to keep fighting this. It just takes time down at the General Assembly.
Great. And then there's another question about the funding mechanism related to that in the ESA. It says, I was under the impression that schools are getting funding based on pre-COVID attendance still now. So could the money go to students who were in the public school up to when they start making schools get their funding based on current numbers and not pre-COVID numbers?
So I don't know the exact answer to that question. I do know that there is COVID funding out there, and the governor has challenged the school districts to spend that money. There's an accountability problem. I don't know that they're tracking what's going on with this money. So that's a huge problem. But I will tell you that the governor does have a $30 million bucket of money, COVID money, that he is going to be putting forth for micro grants. And essentially how it's going to work is it's for learning loss. So if a parent has a child that's clearly fallen behind, they can apply for this grant and they can hire tutors, or they can, do a number of things to help their child get caught up. That program is not in place right now. We're trying to get more details on it. As soon as we do have the details, we will be posting it on our website. But that program, and they've talked about it a couple of times. I've heard it in briefings with the governor. So I know this program is coming. They haven't got it up and running. So some of that COVID money will be available for learning loss.
Okay, perfect. We have just a couple more questions. One says, not especially about school choice, but isn't part of the problem with the government school system that the districts are too large and therefore less accountable? Fairfax County has $2.7 billion.
Yeah, I would agree with that comment. I do believe that once you get over a certain size, it's very hard to manage a school system. There's a tremendous amount of corruption. I was listening to a podcast the other day. Many of you may have heard of Jordan Peterson. He's a very smart clinician, psychologist out of Canada. He said all systems move to corruption at some point, and especially if they get larger. And that's what's happening. These school systems are so huge. It would be so difficult to manage it and get it right. But how do you break it down, right? You're going to get a lot of resistance to trying to reduce the size of these school districts. In Pennsylvania, in Virginia, we have 129 school districts. In Pennsylvania, they have 5,000 school districts, 5,000 school boards. I mean, it's huge. I'm sorry, not 5,000, 500 school boards. So they have much smaller districts than we do here in Virginia. I'm not saying they have better education. I'm just saying that's what they've done. And so it's much more manageable. But I don't know how you change that. I think you would have tremendous pushback from your local counties. One of the things that's important to understand is in 1971 we changed the Constitution was rewritten in Virginia, and because of the issue of segregation, they wrote the Constitution in a way that gave local public schools a tremendous amount of power. Go back to what I said about charter schools. They can stop charter schools. They have a tremendous amount of power. And unfortunately, that power has been abused. And, I don't know what the solution is to fixing that problem other than changing your Constitution, but that's a huge nut to crack. What else you got, Lindsay?
Yes, I think we have one more question. Okay, this one says, can you explain what would be entailed in becoming a pre-approved provider of educational services? Would parents not be able to use money from the ESA from an organization that isn't a pre-approved provider? And would the process of becoming pre-approved be difficult or come with any strings attached?
So I can't give you a solid answer on that because we've never had to do this yet. But there will be a way for somebody to apply to be an approved provider. There will be an application process. There will be probably in the Department of Education, there will be a group of people that will review that, and there will be certain metrics that they will have to meet in order for that to happen. I'll give an example that I've heard of, equestrian. So some children apparently use horses for therapy, and it helps them learn. So a parent, I think it was in Arizona, it might have been another state had an ESA, applied to have those services, those equestrian services paid for, and it was approved because they demonstrated how it helped their child learn better. So that's sort of what we picture will happen here. Hopefully we won't get bogged down in the red tape with this kind of stuff, although I think probably in the end it will to some degree. But there will be ways for parents to, if there's a provider of some service that they really need for their child, to help them learn, then they'll be able to apply for that and hopefully get approved. I see that the students have to go, and thank you everybody for joining us. And Greg, if they have any more questions, please feel free to contact me. I'd be more than happy to talk to them about it. Okay. What other questions?
I think we've run through all the questions. There was just a follow-up comment about the numbers of students in school, I guess might still be based on pre-COVID student numbers right now. So maybe we can just follow up with that a little bit later if we can just have a continuing conversation, but we don't have any other questions in the chat right now.
Okay, well, going to that issue, so the Department of Education used to have on their website till recently all the data, enrollment data, funding for every district in Virginia. Chris Allen, who's on the call, works with me. Chris, do they have the enrollment numbers? What's the latest, 21? Do they have those on the website?
The way it normally works is you have it used to work this way. They've changed the website and all the numbers are not there as they were historically. So generally they are reported in an unaudited fashion, and the actual audited numbers come in maybe a year or two later. The numbers that we have used to project were 2019 through 2020, right before COVID, before all the money hit. That's where how we generated the numbers you've heard about today. They need to be updated, but for a lot of reasons that people have mentioned on this conversation, I think that in many ways they skew the result. So from a percentage basis, the numbers are good. From an actual amount, Craig quoted a number, $4,500 to probably $6,500 is a good number. But I don't know at this point, just don't know.
Little history on that. So back in 2015, when Chris wrote the language for this bill, by the way, when he originally wrote the language back in 2015, we were guided to go speak with the Virginia Department of Education to figure out what money could we use for the ESA. And they told us you can use part of the state funding, which worked out to be an average $4,500. We recently met with the Youngkin administration on this, and they said, oh, no, you can have all of the state funding, which is closer to $6,000 to $6,500. So we're still trying to work through that right now, trying to figure out what money actually parents would have access to. But that's good news in the sense that parents would have actually more money to educate their child. So there's still some complexity and confusion around exactly how much money, but Chris is right. It's in that $4,500 to $6,500 ballpark. Any other comments or questions? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I appreciate everybody's time, and certainly you know how to reach us through the VEOA website. If you have any questions, you're going to continue to hear from us. We're going to have another call next month, another coalition call. We're going to have these every month, and we're going to bring in speakers and so forth that have been dealing with this in other states. That's my goal, so we can learn more about what they've done and how they've gotten in the past. So there's no other questions. Everybody enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again in a month. Thank you.